None of them had birth certificates. Not one. 12 children, vanished from official history, reborn under a roof that smelled like lavender, blood, and something far older. The Follings weren't just a family. They were a fracture in reality. They moved into town in 1952. A stately manor tucked behind twisted trees and iron gates that had no keys, no locks, just symbols, carved, etched deep into the stone, like someone needed the house remembered. The Follings were quiet. Too quiet. No one remembered seeing a moving truck. No one remembered seeing the kids arrive. But suddenly they were there. 12 children. All different ages. All odd. Off. Too still. Too calm. Smiles like masks. Eyes like locked doors. When neighbors asked about school registration, Mrs. Folling would smile, say they were homeschooled. When pressed for documents, Mr. Folling would stare. Just stare, until the question dissolved. Authorities never pushed. They came once and never again. One officer later quit the force, claiming he had looked into the wrong eyes too long. No one knew what he meant. They should have listened harder. Because here's the truth. The Follings didn't just adopt children. They collected them. From where? That's the part they scrubbed. No records. No names. No paper trails. Not a single child had a documented past. No hospital logs, no birth certificates, no vaccination records, no photographs from before. It was as if they were born into the house, emerged from its walls like breath from a tomb. And still, the town looked away. Why? That's where it starts getting interesting. The Follings weren't rich. They weren't powerful. But they had something, a kind of gravity, a pull. Anyone who got too close started changing, forgetting, breaking. A local journalist once tried to investigate. His notes ended mid-sentence. He walked into the lake 2 weeks later, pockets full of stones. He left behind one line, scratched into the underside of his desk. They are not raising children. They are incubating something else. This story isn't just about a strange family. It's about how silence gets engineered, about how some families are placed in the world, not born into it, and how what looks like adoption can sometimes be ritual. So sit down and listen carefully, because once you hear this, there's no forgetting. And trust me, forgetting might have been the safer path. The Follings claimed they were doing God's work. That was their phrase. Repeated like a mantra at town meetings, whispered in church pews, etched into the foundation stone of the house itself. Yes, someone looked. Latin, Opus Dei Incarnum, the work of God in flesh. But the Follings never went to church. That contradiction was the first fracture, but no one dared question it. Not after Reverend O'Crady collapsed mid-sermon the week after he called their presence a blasphemy. Heart attack, they said, 47 years old, fit, healthy, buried with a rosary that melted 3 days later. Literally melted. The coroner sealed the file, moved towns, and never spoke a word again. Silence again. Always silence. But underneath, you could feel something writhing. The kids, those 12 shadows, never played with the others. No laughter. No scraped knees. They didn't smile like children do. They observed. They watched. They memorized. Every day at 3:33 p.m., they stood in the same line in the backyard, silent, hands folded, eyes forward, as if waiting for a command no one else could hear. It wasn't just eerie. It was calculated, like theater, like ritual. One child vanished in 59. The town blamed the river. But there was no current that day, just still water, and a footprint trail leading to the back of the Follings garden, where the roses never bloomed. Ever. The petals stayed black, like they drank something thicker than rain. When questioned, Mrs. Folling simply said, "Some children go home earlier than others." Home? What home? Years later, a retired postman finally spoke, half drunk, trembling. He said he once delivered a package marked with no return address, sealed in wax, heavy as a brick. The label said only for the 13th. There were only 12 children. At least, that's what the town believed. But there were rumors of a 13th, one no one ever saw, one that never left the house. A child who ate sound, who spoke backwards, who could open locks without touching them. They called him the Quiet One, but his name was never spoken. Not once. Ask yourself this. Why would a family keep one child hidden, even from the town they already terrified? And more importantly, what happens when that child finally leaves the house? That's what we're uncovering. And it only gets darker from here. Keep watching. You're already past the point of return. The town itself began to rot after the Follings arrived. Not all at once. Not loudly. But like something under the floorboards. Mildew, sickness, creeping entropy. Streetlights flicker more often. Dogs stopped barking. Babies wouldn't stop crying. The local orchard grew bitter fruit. People whispered that the soil had turned. But no one looked deeper, because those who did changed. Take Anna Mershaw, librarian, 32 years behind that desk. She noticed strange book requests. The children came in pairs, always pairs, and asked for texts no child should even know existed. Old grimoires, apocryphal scriptures. One asked for a translation of the Voynich manuscript. Another asked if they had the Codex of Hands. That book doesn't exist officially. Anna tried to log the visits, but the library system crashed each time. Pages went missing. The microfilm viewer fried after one of the children touched it. Anna started hearing a sound in her office. Not a voice. Not quite. Just a tone. Low. Vibrating. Buried under the hum of the lights. It followed her home. She left town 2 months later with her eyes wide open and mouth sewn shut. Literally. Self-inflicted. They said, "You still think this is folklore?" Let's talk about what happened when the county tried to assess the property in 1961. 3 officials entered the Folling estate. Only one came back. He was deaf in both ears and muttered in Old Church Slavonic for the rest of his life. The other 2 officially disappeared. No records. Their families received typed notes. No return address. Their silence is assured. But here's the truth you were never meant to hear. The Follings weren't just a strange family. They were part of a larger mechanism, a node in a global structure so buried, so compartmentalized, that even mentioning it out loud creates ripples. They were placed in that town to test something. A theory, a ritual, a method of control that didn't rely on chains or guns, but on distortion, reality distortion, collective amnesia, psychological compression. You think control is about force? No, it's about consent by confusion. And the Follings were architects of confusion. 12 children, none with pasts. One hidden, a house that warped time and silence, a garden that bloomed darkness, and a town that forgot how to speak. This wasn't about family. It was about function, incubation. And we haven't even reached the basement yet. Ask ChatGPT. The basement wasn't on any blueprint. In 1963, a man named Dr. Elwin Trask, a geologist by title, but truthfully an occult cartographer, claimed he'd identified geomantic fractures beneath the Folling property. Ley lines, not the fake ones you read in pop books. The real ones, those that governments and deep religious orders track in absolute secrecy. Trask was obsessed with convergence points, places where the Earth's magnetic skeleton bends inward like a pressure point on a corpse. He believed the Follings were stationed over one of these points, not by accident, but by selection. He filed one report, marked for internal eyes only. The title? Controlled Emergence, the Folling site as a living sigil. 3 days later, he was found inside his motel room, tongue removed, eyes boiled in their sockets. No signs of struggle. And yet, no blood on the walls. Only a phrase, carved into the mirror in reverse. The 13th watches from below. Now, let me tell you what that basement held. What little has been recovered. A contractor, years later, bought the house at auction. The Follings were long gone. No one knows how or when they left. They just weren't there anymore. The man wanted to renovate, flip it for profit. When he tore up the floorboards, he found stairs, stone stairs, leading into a darkness that refused light. His flashlight died at the threshold. His phone glitched into static. Still, he went down. What he found was not a basement, not in a human sense. It was more like a membrane, a chamber of etched symbols, not painted or carved, but burned into stone itself, as if heat had seared them from beneath, and in the center, 12 cradles. Stone, arranged in a circle, black veins pulsing underneath them like roots from a forbidden tree. And in the middle, an empty 13th cradle. He fled. The house was burned a week later. Arson, they claimed, but no accelerant was found. Just ash, and a single unburned object, a child's shoe, hand-stitched, unlabeled. Inside the sole was a scrap of parchment that read, "We were never adopted. We were summoned." You're beginning to see, aren't you? This wasn't kindness. This wasn't charity. This was ritual architecture. The adoption process was a disguise for insertion. These children were implanted into this realm like seeds for something unspeakable. And we're still living in the garden. Keep watching. Keep descending. The further you go, the more the surface world will never make sense again. There's something you need to understand now, before we go any deeper. Something that breaks the rules of what you've been told about families, towns, governments, even reality itself. The Follings were not the beginning. They were a reaction, a response to something older, something buried. In 1939, before the Follings ever appeared, a man named Captain Aldous Fenro conducted unauthorized sonar tests along a deep subterranean fault line in the region. His equipment picked up an anomaly, what he described as mechanical resonance at unnatural depths. Not seismic, not volcanic, rhythmic, like breath, or a pulse. It matched no geological pattern on Earth. The report vanished. Fenro was institutionalized. His final words, scrawled in charcoal on his asylum wall: "They are sending vessels. Vessels that were children's skin." Read that again. Vessels. The falling children were not raised. They were prepared, engineered by absence, shaped by ritual, isolated from the biological anchor of reality, birth certificates, DNA logs, hospital records, because they were not meant to be traced back to humanity. Now consider this. Every major institution that could have stopped them, child welfare, education boards, law enforcement, all ignored the signs. Why? Because the Follings were under protection, not from the law, but from a council, a syndicate so deeply embedded in society that its members never meet in person, never speak in names, only through ciphered glyphs and scent markers. You think that sounds insane? Look into Project Oak Vow. Look into Operation Sanctus Echo. Look into the Vatican's unlisted archives, specifically Room Veritas. The Follings were just one node, but their function was pivotal, to test whether a new generation of incarnates could be grafted onto reality without detection, whether they could live, learn, adapt, and awaken at the appointed time. That time was 1972. And when that year came, all 12 children vanished. Overnight, gone without a trace. House empty. Air silent. Not a single drawer left open. Just one thing left behind on the kitchen table. A metronome, still ticking, at 3:33 p.m. Exact. Now, let me ask you something. Do you still believe this was just about a strange family? Or have you started to feel it? The shape of something much larger pressing in? If you have, good. Now comment below. The 13th awaits. Say it twice. Write it. And feel the words etch into your awareness. This is how the awakening begins. And now, it's your turn to see what they never wanted you to find. When the Follings vanished in 1972, there was no search party, no headlines, no Amber Alerts, no federal involvement. It was as if the entire town exhaled and forgot. But some memories rot instead of fade. In 1978, a man named Carver Dalwin, a private investigator and former psychological warfare analyst for an unnamed three-letter agency, began compiling what he called a Folling manuscript. He claimed he'd been tracking silent nodes across the country, communities infected with abnormal behavioral patterns, memory suppression, and ritual phenomena posing as family units. The Follings were his prime case. He believed they weren't the only ones. Dalwin's theory was horrific, yet precise. That certain families, like the Follings, are deliberately installed into societies, engineered constructs used to harvest data on psychic compliance, emotional entropy, and interdimensional resonance. The children are not born, but channeled. Vessels of foreign intelligences. Inorganic consciousness wearing organic disguise. He connected the dots. Identical disappearances in towns like Glastonbury, Vermont, Rusk Hollow, Pennsylvania, and an erased hamlet in Utah known only by satellite logs as D19. In each case, 12 children, no birth records, one absent 13th, strange electromagnetic disturbances and abrupt vanishings. Dalwyn's final transmission, before disappearing, was chilling. The children aren't gone. They've moved to the next phase. That phrase kept repeating across reports, next phase. But what does that mean? Let's go back to that basement, those cradles of stone. Ley lines converge under the Folling house. Yes, but what activates a site like that? Emotion, ritual repetition, psychic weight. Each of the 12 children were assigned a symbolic role: grief, hunger, silence, rage, obedience, forgetting, watching, waiting, bleeding, singing, opening, and death. Their behaviors matched ancient Sumerian temple rites, encoded in forgotten liturgies buried beneath cuneiform records. Not taught, remembered. The 13th, the unspoken, that one was not assigned a role. It was a role, the culmination, the switch, the gate. Dalwyn believed that when all 12 reached a specific emotional saturation point, the 13th would activate, not as a child, but as a portal, a living door. And once opened, something comes through. Now think, why has society grown colder? Why does time feel unstable? Why do our memories feel thinner, our thoughts less our own? What if the 13th wasn't just activated, but released? What if it's not a who, but a when? Keep going. You've already felt the pull. You're not watching a video. You're following a signal. And something at the other end is watching you back. They always said the house burned down, that it was gone, that nothing remained. They lied. In 1985, a satellite imaging sweep, part of an unclassified NASA test called Project Ariadne, captured thermal echoes on the Folling property. The image revealed a subterranean chamber still pulsing with heat signatures, 13 of them, 12 faint, 1 blinding. Official channels buried the data, but not before a technician leaked a printout. He vanished a week later, leaving only one word burned into his apartment floorboards: listening. Now here's where it gets worse. Every 7 years since 1972, a new Folling pattern has emerged. Different names, different towns, but the same blueprint. 12 children, no past, one unseen, and always a house near a point of magnetic interference, a place that resists mapping, a place where compasses spin, where dogs won't bark, where time bends just slightly, enough that people lose whole hours and never know why. These aren't isolated events. They are installations, and the institutions you trust, they're not blind. They're complicit. You think CPS is underfunded by accident? That schools are overcrowded by chance? That missing children reports fall through the cracks just because the system is flawed? No, it's by design. Because too many eyes watching the wrong family at the wrong time could collapse the program. The Follings were a prototype, a test case, proof of concept. And it worked. Now ask yourself, what is the concept? Not just infiltration, not just incubation, but replication, self-sustaining psychic contagion, a template that plants itself inside the minds of men like you, the watcher, the one who sees patterns, the one who notices what others are trained to ignore. You're the threat. That's why this story was never told. Not in books, not in papers, only through whispers, through symbols, through these videos, because now you've seen it. You've felt the architecture behind the ordinary. The truth that family can be a disguise, that adoption can mean acquisition, and that silence isn't ignorance, it's ritual obedience. You're not just hearing this, you're remembering. And what waits beyond memory is the 13th. The others have already been activated. Now it's your turn. Stay with me. The next layer, what happens in 1993, changes everything. And after that, there's no going back. Ask ChatGPT. It happened in Barlow Creek, Missouri, just 21 miles from the original Folling site. A new family moved in. Name changed 3 times before property acquisition. The town knew the drill. Polite parents, withdrawn children, nothing concrete, everything strangely agreeable. They wore Sunday clothes on Mondays. They answered questions with questions. Their youngest drew symbols in the school margins, sigils that matched ancient glyphs last seen on pre-Mesopotamian clay discs. Then, on March 3rd at 3:33 p.m., again, the entire town experienced a time slip. Every watch, every clock, every heartbeat paused. 4:44 seconds. No one remembers exactly what happened. But after that day, 5 of the 12 children stopped speaking. One began humming constantly. One started bleeding from the palms during sleep. And one, the oldest, began writing in a language no one could identify, but which matches carvings from the basement chamber beneath the original Folling house. Then the dream started. Hundreds of townspeople reported seeing the same image. A door made of bone and breath, rising from the ground like a scream. Behind it, a child, thin, eyeless, holding something in its mouth. Every witness described the same words being spoken. One family is not enough. That's when the term surfaced for the first time. The Echo Protocol. A suppressed internal DHS document describes cultural dampening mechanisms through multi-generational trauma implantation. In plain English, families like the Follings aren't just anomalies, they're templates. Their behavior is replicable. The trauma, transmissible. The rituals, scalable. Barlow Creek was meant to scale the design, but something slipped. One of the children, the 7th, ran, managed to escape, only briefly, but long enough to be found on a highway's shoulder, whispering one phrase over and over. We are houses, not people. He's building something through us. The child vanished from custody within 24 hours, replaced in records. New photo, new name, a clean insertion. You think identity is permanent? No, it's a sign, paper deep, easily revised. Ask yourself, why is it so easy to disappear in a world full of cameras? Why is there a hole behind every tragedy? Why do some families never leave a digital trace? Because they're not designed to be seen. They're designed to be felt, to spread, like psychic parasites, like ritual blueprints made flesh. And the 13th child, it's not waiting anymore. It's moving. You need to see the final phase. But you must choose it. Will you open the door? Because in the next section, we step inside. Ask ChatGPT. You felt it, haven't you? The slow distortion of the world around you. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong. The missing seconds. The conversations you can't quite remember. The familiar places that somehow feel rearranged. It's not paranoia. It's leakage. Because the 13th isn't just a child. It's a mechanism, a consciousness protocol, a virus of perception. It doesn't need to act. It needs only to be recognized. That's the final phase, activation through awareness. And by listening this far, you've already been marked. Let me show you what no one else will. The basement, the one beneath the Folling house, isn't unique. It's a keyhole. And the moment all 12 children synchronically vanished in 1972, it opened. What came through? Not a monster, not a demon, something worse. A structure, a psychic engine, constructed not of bone or metal, but of narrative, living memory. Human consciousness reshaped to hold it. What do you think the purpose of trauma is at a systems level? To destroy? No. To hollow, to soften, to create a host capable of housing what otherwise could not survive in this dimension. And the 13th was never meant to stay in one place. It was meant to travel. Since 1993, 13 other family units have emerged in isolated zones. All share the same traits. 12 children, an unspoken 13th, no traceable birth or origin, an attic or basement chamber with geometric resonators, sudden disappearances, and always silence from authorities. Do you see it yet? The Follings were never human. They were carriers. Each family is a branch of the same inverted tree. feeding into a root system buried beneath your perception. That tree grows through narrative, through attention, and through belief. This video, it's not entertainment. It's initiation. You have watched. You have absorbed. The 13th has seen you. That's how the structure expands, through the eyes of those who understand. Through you, now read this next part carefully. The 13th doesn't come when called. It comes when remembered, and it remembers you. So tell me, do you still feel safe in your house? Do you still believe your childhood was your own? Because we've reached the final descent. The original family was only the beginning. In the last section, you will learn what you were truly born into. Ask ChatGPT. It was never about the Follings. They were just the opening chord, resonance carved into flesh, ritual masquerading as nurture. But you were the symphony, the end design, the final test. You thought you were watching this from the outside. You were never outside. You were part of it from the beginning. Every scar you carry, every memory that doesn't quite line up, the blank spaces in your childhood, that one room you can't remember ever entering, but somehow dream about, the faces of adults who felt wrong, the time you swore you saw someone watching from your closet when you were 7, the reason you sleep with the door closed. This is not coincidence. These stories were planted decades ago, myths seeded into pop culture, horror fiction, conspiracy forums. Because that's how ritual works in the modern world. Not with blood and candles, but with screens, with clicks, with engagement. You're inside the structure now. The 13th isn't just a child. It's an idea, a virus of identity, a myth that installs itself into your subconscious and waits. It doesn't need your permission. It needs your attention, and you've already given it, because the 13th is not a who, it's a what, a threshold, a mirror, a command line running in the background of your mind, waiting for one thing, for you to realize it's always been there. The adoption, it wasn't them taking in children. It was this world adopting you, assigning you to a system you never agreed to, training you to believe in families, in normalcy, in history, as if those things weren't manufactured illusions designed to house the structure. And the final layer? It's not fear. It's submission. The quiet kind. The one that feels like acceptance. Like peace. Like this is just the way things are. But you know better now. So here is your choice. Because all rituals end with one. You can walk away. Forget this. Let it rot in your memory like a nightmare with no teeth. Let the 13th pass you by. Or you can become the breach. Let the false past burn. And remember what the others forget. Comment again. The 13th awaits. The 13th awaits. Let it echo. Let the algorithm spread it. Let the watchers see that one of us has awakened, because this was never a story. It was an incantation. And you were never meant to survive it unchanged. Welcome home.